Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the salty underbelly of 18th century France, where bored fishermen turned cod ribs into high-stakes entertainment. Picture this. You're shivering on a windswept Breton shore, lungs burning with brine and yesterday's cheap wine. The catch was meager again, 3 mackerel, a scowling crab, but nobody's heading home yet. Because tonight's the real prize. Someone's about to lose their last good shirt over a handful of haddock vertebrae. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop a comment with your location and local time, Marseille or Montreal, noon or midnight. I want to know who's braving this rabbit hole with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots crunch over dried bladder wrack as you approach the village's lone tavern, a shack held together by fish glue and sheer spite. Inside, men huddle around driftwood tables, groaning under tankards of something that's definitely not beer, but their eyes aren't on the drinks. They're locked on a scatter of pearly bones gleaming in the firelight, each one polished smooth by calloused thumbs and desperation. Here's the thing. Wasting any part of the catch was blasphemy in these parts. Think of it as the original zero-waste lifestyle. If zero waste included gambling your boat's rudder on a lucky roll when cod stocks crashed in 1723. Yes, that's an actual historical footnote. Fishermen started repurposing bones faster than a Renaissance sculptor eyeing marble scraps. But instead of carving angels, they etched tiny anchors and storm clouds into rib bones. A thrifty solution. Absolutely. Also a shockingly chaotic one. Take the petty deluge rule etched into a plank near St. Malo. To play, you had to balance eel vertebrae on your nose while reciting a dirty limerick about the local tax collector. Succeed, and you earned an extra turn. Fail, and your opponent got to dump a bucket of kelp down your trousers. Practical and unhinged, the official motto of coastal gaming. Now lean closer. Smell that. Salt, herring guts. The tang of something darker, maybe the ghost of poor Etienne Leblanc, who famously bet his own teeth during a losing streak. Rumor says his opponents wore them as necklace charms. Historians still argue whether the games were born from practicality or pure seaside madness. Me, I'm just glad no one's making me wager my molars over a podcast. You're handed a die carved from a whale's ear bone, cold as a kraken's kiss, and told to roll for la marée noire. Black tide. It's not the worst named hazard when your entire world revolves around moonlit waves. But here's the kicker. Early rules demanded you lick the bone after a bad roll. A superstition. A crude flavor enhancer. Both, probably. Watch the firelight dance across the table as someone slaps down a sturgeon's backbone, the original wild card, and grins like a man who's never heard of scurvy. Laughter puffs through the room stale, and sharp. You're starting to suspect these games weren't just about passing time. They were maps, prayers, ways to outwit the fickleness of tides and empty nets. Now, here's a nugget for your next trivia night. Coastal midden pits reveal cod bones drilled with identical markings across 4 different villages. Coordinated rules, a league, or just some guy named Pierre who got really into bone etching and rode his donkey from port to port like a medieval game designer. Don't answer that. The hearth crackles. A drunkard begins humming a shanty about squid ink cheating scandals. And you realize the bone in your palm still smells like the sea, like hunger, like the desperate ingenuity of people who looked at a pile of scraps and thought, let's make magic. Outside, the tide whispers secrets only the bones remember. Inside, the game goes on. The air reeks of salt and seaweed as you shuffle across the damp cobblestones of a Breton fishing village, your boots crunching on oyster shells left by the morning's catch. It's 1743, and the moon hangs low over the harbor like a bloated pearl. Its silver light glinting off the scales of mackerel piled in wooden crates. Here, time bends to the tides, and tonight, the villagers aren't just mending nets or gutting fish. They're gathering around driftwood tables, clutching carved bone tokens in calloused hands, their eyes sharp as gulls' beaks. You've stumbled into the heart of La Danse des Marais, the tides dance, a ritual as old as the cliffs themselves. Every full moon, when the sea retreats like a lover scorned, the fishermen huddle in smoke-stained taverns to play Elos de la Mer, the bone of the sea. The rules: simple. Toss a set of polished cod vertebrae onto a grid scratched into the table. Land 3 bones in the tide's embrace, a ring of barnacle-encrusted rope, and you've won the favor of the moon. Miss, and you'll spend the next week scrubbing bilgewater from your neighbor's boat. But this isn't just a game. It's a prophecy. The villagers believe the bones whisper secrets. A good toss means fat herring runs and calm waters. A bad one, well, better start building an ark. Of course, not everyone's convinced. Old man Leclerc, a grizzled sailor with a nose like a pickled beet, swears. He once saw a drunkard win 7 rounds in a row, only to drown the next day when his skiff capsized in a squall. The sea's a fickle mistress, he growls, spitting a wad of tobacco into the fire. She laughs at your little bones. Still, the rituals persist. Women braid kelp into their hair for luck. Children chant rhymes to the moon. And every player, without fail, kisses their bone dice before tossing, a superstition so ingrained, you'd think the Pope himself decreed it. Here's the twist. Historians still argue whether these games actually predicted the future, or just gave fishermen an excuse to blame the moon for their bad luck. After all, 18th century Breton tax records show villages that played Elos de la Mer had worse crop yields than their inland neighbors. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the moon was just a terrible accountant. But let's not forget the real magic here. The bones themselves. Each one's etched with symbols, a coiled eel for cunning, a bream's fin for speed, a grinning octopus for well. Nobody's quite sure. One theory, the carver had a sense of humor. And then there's the infamous widow's mark, a skull and anchor design rumored to appear on bones touched by drowned sailors. Spot one, and the whole tavern falls silent. Even the drunkest player will cross himself twice and order another ale. You're halfway through a game now, the bone dice warm in your palm. The fire crackles. The tide creeps closer. And somewhere, far out at sea, a fish leaps, its spine destined to become someone's lucky charm. The tavern door creaks open, letting in a gust of briny air that makes the fire sputter. Your elbow deep in your third game when a woman in a salt-stained apron slams a tankard of ale beside your dice. Careful with that bream's fin, she mutters, nodding at your hand. Last man who rolled 3 in a row got his nets torn to shreds by a swordfish the next morning. You freeze mid-roll. The bones clatter 2 eels and a widow's mark. The room inhales sharply. Someone whispers about the 1713 massacre of St. Malo, when a dozen ships vanished after a dice maker carved his initials into a whale's vertebrae. Historians still argue whether the carver's hubris cursed the fleet, or if they just sailed into the worst storm in Breton history. Your opponent, a one-eyed sailor reeking of herring, leans in. His breath smells like low tide. They say the bones remember, he hisses, revealing a die carved from a narwhal tusk. This one's seen the belly of a kraken. You're about to call nonsense when he rolls a perfect trio of widows. The fire dims. A cold draft snakes through the room. Outside, waves crash violently against the docks. Here's the kicker. That narwhal tusk. It's not a tusk at all. Last year, a marine biologist carbon dated a similar unicorn bone from this very village. Turns out it's just a 19th century walrus penis bone some drunk whaler sold as a joke. But try telling that to the sailor, currently crossing himself 3 times and chugging sacramental wine. The widow's mark glints in the gloom as you pocket your dice. Somewhere beneath the tavern's floorboards, a rat drags a fish head into the shadows. The game continues. The widow's mark stays warm in your palm long after the game ends, like a coal from a dying fire. Dawn leaks through the tavern's cracked shutters, turning fishbone dice into jagged shadows on the table. That's when the merchant finds you. You know his type. Velvet waistcoat straining over a belly fed on port wine and opportunism. He's clutching a lacquered box that reeks of rosewater and desperation. A true collector's set, he croons, flipping open the lid. Inside, 6 gilded cod bones gleam under a layer of crushed pearls. You smirk. 18th century aristocrats loved their shiny things almost as much as they loved pretending they couldn't smell the fish stink beneath the gold leaf. Traders like him swarmed port towns after Louis XIV's death in 1715. Cash-hungry vultures capitalizing on a kingdom in flux. They'd buy village dice for a handful of coins then sell them to bored nobles as rustic curiosities. By 1720, half the Parisian elite had fish bones clattering in their salons. Marie Antoinette even commissioned a set from dolphin vertebrae dipped in silver. She reportedly complained they tasted oceanic when she licked them. Don't ask why she licked them. But here's the twist. Those fancy rules aristocrats loved. Mostly made-up nonsense. Merchants slapped on palace-approved scoring systems where landing a mackerel spine upright meant you'd inherit a dukedom. Actual fishermen would have gutted you for that blasphemy. Their games were about survival, not simulating inheritance tax. Still, you can't deny the hustle. One slick-haired salesman convinced the Comte de Provence that cod ribs aligned with Venus could predict his mistress's loyalty. The Comte lost 3 chateaux and a stable of Arabian horses before realizing the dice were rigged. You run a thumb over the merchant's gilded bones, careful to avoid the chipped edge where the gilt hides a barnacle scar. Historians still argue whether these city versions diluted the game's soul or saved it from extinction. You're more interested in how the merchant's left eye twitches when you point out his authentic Breton relics are carved from Thames river carp, the real miracle. How these bony abominations got popular at all. Picture it. Powdered wigs bent over stinking fish parts, counting pike fins like astrological signs. They'd play in perfumed rooms where the air was 30% lavender oil, 70% low-tide reek. Versailles floorboards probably still stink of desperation and haddock. A shout snaps your head up. Across the tavern, a sailor's fist connects with a trader's jaw over a disputed bet. Blood drips onto a bone dice tray, bad luck, according to both peasant lore and palace protocol. The merchant seizes the moment. Rough company for a person of your discernment, he whispers, shoving the box into your hands. Perhaps Madame prefers a more civilized game. You almost laugh. Civilized here means rules bent like pretzels to flatter rich idiots. Nobles banned the widow's mark too morbid and replaced storm symbols with cherubs, but money talks. By 1730, Marseille's workshops were pumping out bone sets lacquered in gold and lies. The finest. A matching pair of swordfish jaws encrusted with sapphires, commissioned by a duke who believed they'd help him cheat death. Spoiler, they didn't. He died mid-roll from syphilis. Sunlight hits the merchant's box, revealing fingerprints in the pearl dust. Somewhere beneath the gilt, the original bones ridges whisper of salt and struggle. You wonder if the fish fought its death as hard as peasants fought tax collectors. Then decide not to ask. Outside, a carriage clatters past, its wheels spewing mud from the king's highway. The merchant taps his foot. Too late, you're already slipping out the back door, his overpriced trinket left abandoned beside a tankard of stale ale. Let the aristocrats keep their gilded lies. Real power's in the unvarnished spine of a haddock, rough, raw, and hungry enough to cut your palm if you grip it wrong. Somewhere down the coast, a debt-ridden countess rolls a dolphin vertebra across a marble floor. It wobbles to a stop beside her lover's boot. Neither notices the maggots squirming in the bone's hollow core, tiny reminders that even the grandest games eventually rot. You hunch over the warped tavern table, 13 fish bones rattling in your cupped palms like teeth from a sea witch's necklace. The rules here aren't etched in some duke's leather-bound ledger, they're written in brine and bad decisions. Across from you, a one-eyed sailor slams his tankard, spilling ale over a bone dice tray carved from a whale's vertebrae. Mind the drowning pool, he growls, tapping a knuckle on the symbol of waves swallowing an anchor. You don't need the warning. Everyone knows the first rule of fishbone gambling. The ocean always eats its share. Scoring here mirrors the channel's mood, swings. 1 minute you're riding high on a calm tide triple roll. Next you're bleeding points to the squid's embrace penalty. Historians link the game's brutal reversals to real 18th century maritime insurance logs, where a single storm could bankrupt a fleet. But good luck telling that to the drunkard currently accusing you of witchcraft because you rolled 3 sturgeon spines face up. Pro tip: when someone mentions burnt offerings, start counting the exits. The quirks, oh, they're gloriously unhinged. Land a fisherman's folly. Combo 2 eel bones crossed over a crab claw. And tradition demands you chug a pint of brine to honor Poseidon's displeasure. You've seen a soused silk merchant vomit oysters for 3 hours after that little ritual. Rumor says King Louis XV's nephew lost a testicle during a particularly zealous saltwater chugging contest. Scholars still argue whether the game's infamous blood and brine phase led to more deaths than actual piracy in the 1720s. A hiss jerks your attention back. The sailor's thrown a leviathan's maw, 4 interlocked bones forming a jagged maw. It's the nuclear option of coastal gaming, a move that wipes your entire score unless you can counter with a mermaid's kiss before the candle burns down. Your fingers hover over the bone dice. 11 possible combos, and all smell vaguely of regret. You roll, the clatter echoes like shrapnel. 2 sea bass barbs and a shark's tooth land in a formation locals call the widow's lament. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Should have known that shark bones' edges are worn smooth by 100 desperate thumbs. Experts think Marseille gamblers filed them down to force specific rolls, a practice that sparked the 1734 bone wars. 3 carvers drowned in harbor duels over doctored dice. Chaos erupts. The sailor flips the table. You duck a flying herring spine as the barkeep starts chanting an old Breton protection hymn. Someone's wig catches fire. Through the smoke, you spot a bone dice wedged in a floor crack, its surface scarred with the mark every dockside player fears, the Kraken's eye. Lose with this in your hand, and by ancient custom, you owe the sea a debt. Most settle it by tossing their boots into the waves at midnight. The delusional try paying in coins. Spoiler, the tide's a ruthless debt collector. You pocket the die during the scuffle. Could sell it to that guilt-ridden philosopher you met in Le Havre, the one who swears cursed gaming tools hold the essence of human folly. Or maybe keep it as a reminder that no matter how sharp your strategy, there's always some greasy-haired hustler ready to capsize your luck. Outside, rain sheets down like the skies, emptying its pockets. A fishmonger trudges past, dragging a cart of mackerel heads destined for broth and bad choices. You flex your salt-crusted fingers. Gambling with fish bones won't fix the holes in your coffers. But as the sailor's unconscious form gets dragged into the alley, you can't help smirking. At least you're not the idiot who bet his ship on a shrimp vertebrae trifecta. The kraken's eye warms in your pocket as you walk. Somewhere beyond the breakers, a wave slams the docks hard enough to shake the street. Could be coincidence. Could be the sea balancing the books. Either way, you pick up the pace, because everyone knows the second rule of fishbone gambling. Run fast when the dice stop rolling and the water starts rising. The stink of yesterday's catch hits you like a debt collector's fist as you stumble into the wharf's dawn bustle. But it's not fish guts making your nose wrinkle. It's power. A dozen women in salt-stained aprons huddle around a barrel-top game board, their bone dice clattering with the precision of naval artillery. Welcome to the underbelly of 18th century strategy, where cod wives outmaneuvered admirals using tools salvaged from lunch scraps. Yes, your tavern shark-tooth dice suddenly feel as intimidating as a kitten's milk teeth. You recognize the leader by her hat, 3 striped bass tails pinned like military medals. Madame Lefevre, they call her, though the Parisian tax rolls list her as Marthe, fishmonger widow. Historians will later scribble about the femmes de Marseille, those working-class women who controlled coastal trade. But right now, she's too busy obliterating a silk-gloved merchant in a high-stakes match. Watch her palm 3 flounder ribs and a mussel shell, the infamous widow's trawl. The merchant sweats through his lace cravat. He's just realized his gilded ivory dice mean nothing here. The house always wins. But the house smells like low tide and ambition. The real shock. These women didn't just play, they rewrote the game. While nobles bickered over yacht designs, fishwives developed probability systems using fishing quotas and lunar cycles. Rumor says they hid strategy manuals inside hollow cod heads, passed hand to hand with the day's catch. Academics still dissect preserved fish guts in museums, praying to find handwritten tips on countering the double anchovy debacle. Spoiler: the closest they've gotten is a 1743 grocery list requesting more turnips, less husbands. Not helpful. Here's the kicker: their leagues had rules stricter than royal edicts. Miss a meeting, you'd find your crab traps mysteriously empty next dawn. Question a sister's move. Prepare for a week of misfortune, like oysters that winked when shucked, yet they protected their own. When dockmasters tried banning women from games in 1721, the Fishwives organized a crab strike, halting all seafood sales until the decree drowned in the harbor. Markets emptied. Aristocrats ate boiled leather for a week. The ban died faster than a jellyfish on a hot quayside, but don't mistake them for saints. The legendary herring hustle of 33 saw 6 players bankrupt a tax collector by luring him into a rigged championship. They used weighted lobster claws, a live eel under the table, and a distractingly handsome fish cutter named Jean Paul. Fun fact: the taxman's diary later confessed he'd have surrendered his coffers sooner if Jean Paul had smiled earlier. History is weird. You sidle closer, pretending to inspect a basket of dubious clams. The current match is all sly glances and bone dice flicked sideways, code for a mackerel gambit. Madame Lefever's opponent just played a sea bass spine across a shark's tooth, but her smirk says she's already 3 combos ahead. It's like watching a pirate admiral orchestrate a mutiny. Quiet, methodical, ruthlessly fishy, historians still argue whether these women reshaped the game for profit, survival, or sheer spite. Me, I'd bet all my squid ink tokens on option 4, because they goddamn well could. Their strategy books, written in vinegar on sailcloth, obviously mixed cribbage tactics with tied charts and recipes for disabling rude customers via fermented shrimp paste. Practical, poetic, slightly psychopathic, a commotion erupts. An apprentice drops a bone die into a puddle. The circle freezes. According to wharf law, spilled dice mean everyone chugs a thimble of eel bile. You shrink back, but Madame Lefever catches your eye. Her wink says she knows you pocketed that Kraken's eye dye last night. Her grin says she's got 7 better ones stitched into her petticoats. You suddenly feel like a minnow at a barracuda banquet as the women resume play. A vendor hawks oysters nearby, fresh, unlike your mayor's integrity. The salty tang of risk hangs thicker here than in any tavern. These aren't games of chance. They're calculated rebellions. Each roll, a quiet screw you to anyone who thought petticoats couldn't trounce powdered wigs. You linger until the market bell clangs, scripting notes on a torn fishing permit. Maybe fortune isn't found in guarded palaces, but in the hands of women who have mastered turning scraps into systems, guts into gold. The Kraken's eye dye burns in your pocket. You consider leaving it as tribute at Madame Lefever's seaweed-strewn stall. But as you reach to drop it, a barnacled hand snags your wrist. Save that for deeper waters, rasps a net mender crouched nearby. She nods toward the harbor, where 3 frigate shadows creep across the waves. Men came asking about bone dice at dawn. Foreign accents, whale-fat candles in their boots. You mutter thanks, already stepping into the maze of alleys. Behind you, the women's laughter rings sharp as gull cries. History remembers kings and treaties and wars. But you're starting to think the alley's shadows cling to you like a second skin as you duck beneath a sagging clothesline. The scent of brine and wet stone sharp in your lungs. The warning about the foreign men lingers. Whale fat candles. That's not a local habit. Your fingers brush the Kraken's eye dye in your pocket, its edges worn smooth from a century of clandestine rolls. Ahead, a flicker of movement. A woman in a patched skirt slips through a doorway, half hidden behind a stack of lobster traps. You follow, ducking into a cramped cellar where the air hums with whispered urgency. Madame Lefevre stands at a table strewn with maps, her fingers tracing the coastline. "They're not here for the games," she mutters to a circle of women. "They're after the ledgers." A murmur ripples through the room. Ledgers, you remember the rumors. How the Fishwives gambling syndicate doubled as a smuggling ring, moving contraband tea and silk under the noses of customs officers. The real game wasn't dice, it was tariffs. Fun fact, 1732 customs report noted a mysterious surge in herring exports that coincided with a shortage of Dutch tea in Paris. Coincidence? The Fishwives ledger, hidden inside a hollowed-out cod skeleton in the Marseille archives, suggests otherwise. A young woman with a scarred cheek slaps a bone die onto the table, a signal. The group disperses, snuffing lanterns. Lefevre grabs your arm. "You've got two choices. Swim with the current or get eaten by it." Before you can answer, she presses a rusted key into your palm. The old lighthouse. Third step from the top. What's there won't drown you if you're quick. You bolt into the night, the key biting your skin. The harbor looms, its waters ink black under a sliver of moon. The lighthouse beam sweeps the docks, illuminating three figures, broad hats, heavy coats, the glint of a pistol. You take the steps two at a time, heart hammering. Third step from the top creaks under your boot. A hidden compartment slides open, revealing a oilcloth-wrapped bundle, ledgers, a cipher wheel, and a single bone die carved with a ship's wheel. Footsteps echo below. You tuck the bundle under your coat and climb to the lantern room where the beacons flame gutters. A voice rasps in accented French. "The Dutch pay well for what you've stolen." You spin, but it's not the foreigners, it's the net mender from the wharf, her smile knife sharp. Lefevre's little spy, hand it over. Here's where history gets slippery. Most accounts say the Fishwives were simple traders, but the Marseille Gazette's 1745 archives mention a shadow fleet of unmarked ships that vanished after delivering supplies to rebel forces in Corsica. Coincidence? The cipher wheel in your hands, etched with symbols matching Corsican rebel codes, suggests not. You feign a stumble, flinging the ledger pages into the beacon's fire. The net mender lunges, but you hurl the bone die at the flame. It cracks, releasing a burst of saltpeter smoke, an old smuggler's trick. Quirky detail, Fishwives often stuffed dice with alchemical powders to create diversions. A 1738 police report bemoaned a most perplexing trend of incendiary gaming devices. As the room chokes with smoke, you dive through a window, crashing into a pile of fishing nets below. the harbor bells clang midnight. Somewhere, a woman's laughter rings out. Lefevers, you'll never know. By dawn, the foreign ship is gone, the ledger ashes scattered on the tide. The fishwives return to their stalls, rolling dice like nothing happened. Historians still argue whether the Corsican connection was real or a myth spun to spook the crown. But next time you sip smuggled tea in a Paris salon, remember, it might have passed through the hands of a woman who could outwit a customs agent with a mackerel bone and a wink. The games never end, they just change players. The dockside air still reeks of burnt parchment and salt as you slip through a rusted iron gate hidden behind a stack of rotting barrels, your boots crunching on crushed oyster shells. That cipher wheel digs into your palm like a guilty secret. You'd laugh if your throat weren't raw from smoke. Turns out smuggling tactics and fishbone gambling have more in common than you'd think. Both require a talent for hiding things in plain sight. A flicker of candlelight leaks from a cellar grate ahead. You crouch, squinting through the iron bars. Below, a dozen figures hunch over workbenches, their hands moving like spiders as they carve intricate patterns into bleached bones. The air hums with the rasp of chisels, and the sharp tang of vinegar used to soften the calcium. You remember from some long ago lesson. One carver holds a sturgeon's spine up to the light, etching symbols so tiny they'd make a scribe weep. A ship's wheel, a coiled rope, a leaping dolphin. It's the same cipher from the smuggled ledger. You've got the look of a man who's seen the bottom of a trawler's net, rasps a voice behind you. You spin to find a woman leaning against the wall, her face a roadmap of scars and salt-cracked lips. She's whittling a shark vertebra into a die, the blade flashing in the half-light. Guillaume's the name, guildmaster, and you're the fool who torched a month's work back at the lighthouse. You open your mouth to protest, but she tosses the half-finished die at your chest. Save it. Lefever's little errand boy, aren't you? The Carvers Guild doesn't deal with runners. We're artists, philosophers, keepers of the bone lore. She snorts, nodding at the cipher wheel in your hand. That trinket, child's play, the real codes are in the marrow. Guillaume leads you down into the workshop, where carvers scatter like crabs at low tide. A workbench holds a half-assembled game set, dice carved from cod ribs, a board inlaid with abalone, tokens shaped like mermaids. We don't just make toys, she says, picking up a whalebone tile etched with constellations. Every piece is a map, a ledger, a love letter, depends who's reading. She flips the tile, the reverse shows a detailed coastline, port routes, safe harbors. The excise men would hang us twice over if they knew. The guild's real genius wasn't in the carvings, but the riddles. Each master left their techniques encoded in verse, passed down through apprentice songs. A 1723 guild ledger, found waterlogged in a Marseille sewer, now under lock and key at the Bibliothèque Nationale, mentions a carver named Mathilde de Leclerc, who hid smuggling roots in nursery rhymes. Her most famous The mackerel's eye sees twice as deep, where the tide's bride does not sleep. Answer: a hidden cove near St. Malo, still used by rum runners in the 1920s. Guillaume slaps a knife into your hand, gesturing to a pile of unmarked bones. Carve a truth the excise men would kill to know, but mind the marrow too deep, and the bone splinters too shallow, and the message fades. You try etching a simple wave pattern, but the chisel skids, gouging the surface. A carver next to you, a one-eyed man, humming a shanty, barks a laugh. Like gutting a fish, boy. Steady hands, soft heart. The guild's riddles sparked a century of feuds. When master carver Henry Dubois died in 1741, he left his cipher carved into a whale's ribcage underwater. Divers still argue whether the treasure was genius or madness. A 1789 text by naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lacépède complains, the so-called scholars of the Carvers Guild have wasted more good brandy debating Dubois' folly than the crown spends on its navy. You're halfway through a passable anchor design when shouts erupt upstairs. Guillaume shoves a burlap sack into your arms, bone dice, maps, a ring of skeleton keys. The excise men are raiding the wharf. Take these to the tannery on Rue Desperchures. Ask for the ivory thread. You're already moving when she grabs your wrist. And if they ask who sent you, tell them the mackerel swims east at midnight. Spoiler: the tannery's ivory thread wasn't thread at all. It was a code for smuggled silk, dyed with a pigment made from crushed cuttlefish ink. A 1738 customs report noted a suspicious shipment of dyestuffs that later vanished from the records. Coincidence: the silk merchant's ledger, found bricked into a Parisian chimney in 1987, listed payments to one G. Guillaume, purveyor of fine boneware. You're 3 streets away when the smell hits you, not fish, but smoke. The tannery's a charred shell, timbers groaning in the wind. A boy darts from the rubble, pressing a wax-sealed jar into your hands. Inside floats a pickled hagfish, its eel-like body coiled around a scroll, the seals broken with a flick of your thumb, the message inside written in a frantic hand. They're burning the guild's workshops. The carver's last cipher is hidden in the rest is ash. But here's the thing about the Bone Carvers Guild: they never wrote their truths once. Every message, every map, every riddle was carved in triplicate. One to hide, one to trade, one to burn. You'll find the hagfish's twin in a crypt under Notre Dame de la Garde. The scroll's missing words etched into a saint's femur. As for the third, some say it's still tucked inside the ribcage of the great skeleton, a blue whale carcass that washed up near Calais in 1734. Its bones picked clean by a guild apprentice named Marie-Louise Vaugies, who later became the most notorious forger in Breton history. But that's a story for another night. Right now, the excise men's boots echo on the cobblestones, and the pickled hagfish is leaking brine down your sleeve. The game's the same as it ever was: carve fast, run faster, and never let them see the chisel marks. The hagfish's brine soaks through your sleeve like a cold slap fitting, since the excisemen's shouts are getting louder. You duck into a leaning shack that smells of tar and desperation, heel catching on a rusted chain wedged in the floorboards. This close to the docks, even the shadows feel slippery. A grimy lantern swings overhead, its light catching the edges of a dice game at the back table. Sailors huddle over bleached bones carved with storm clouds and kraken tentacles. You recognize the style Guillaume's Guild, but rougher, sea-worn. Roll the widow's teeth, growls a man missing 3 fingers, his hand hovering over a die shaped like a shark's vertebra. The others hold their breath as it clatters across the table. A collective groan rises when it lands, with a split fin facing up. Splintered cast, mutters a teenager with salt-crusted eyebrows, means the next nor'easters got our names on it. They abandon the game like rats fleeing a sinking ship. You've heard of this superstition. Sailors believed cracked dice were storm warnings. Practical navigation, tip dressed up as mysticism. A 1712 ship's log from the merchant vessel Etoile du Nord records, tossing a full set of bone dice overboard after a split die coincided with a mast-snapping gale. But here's the twist. They'd break flawed dice on purpose during coastal games. A coded heads-up about treacherous shipping routes, corruption in port, crack a die, Royal Navy patrols lurking, snap a tile. The 3-fingered man eyes your brine-soaked sleeve. You're either smuggling herring or trouble. He flips a bone token engraved with a crow's skull, the sailor's sign for speak carefully. Best learn the chants if you want to walk out of here. At the word chance, the room shifts. Someone hums a low note that vibrates your back teeth. Another slaps the table in a rhythm that feels like a racing pulse. A woman with a tattooed tied chart on her neck slides you a die, still warm from her grip. Whisper your lie to the bone, she says, grinning like a barracuda. The sea always knows. You breathe a half-truth about delivering medical supplies, technically true if you count brandy as antiseptic. The die warms further. The carved waves along its edges, glowing faintly. The woman snorts. Either you're dull as a barnacle, or that's your first truth in weeks. Sailors wove these little rituals into every game. Before casting lots to assign night watches, they'd rub dice with a cloth soaked in rainwater, a nod to the 1720s belief that fresh water cleansed the bones of old misfortunes. More pragmatically, it kept the dice from sticking to frost-bitten fingers during Arctic runs. You spot a sailor surreptitiously dropping his die into a tankard, a practice that supposedly revealed traitors' faces in the foam. He's just drunk. The 3-fingered man grabs your forearm, his thumbnail carving a crescent into your skin. You reek of the Carvers Guild. They ever teach you the real game? Before you can answer, he drags you to a back room hung with shark jaws and pigeon skeletons. A map of the Brittany coast covers the table, tiny bone pins marking ports. Each pin's a player, he says, shifting them like chess pieces. Storm here blocks the excisemen's ship. Riot here draws the garrison away. You need to lose a tooth to win the round. He's describing the rebellion gambit, a strategy game popular among naval deserters. Historians still argue whether these games trained revolutionary tactics or just let drunk sailors blow off steam, though the 1789 Parisian mobs did use fishbone dice to assign tasks during the Bastille siege. As noted in revolutionary Theo Lafarge's intercepted love letters, a sudden crash sends bone pins scattering. The excise men are kicking in the front door. The three-fingered man shoves you toward a hatch hidden under a seal pelt. "You'll want these," he says, tossing a pouch of dice carved with phase of the moon. "And don't piss on the ladder. Jacques sleeps down there." The crawl space under the floorboards is a swamp of mildew, a ND, Chinese letter whispers. Jacques turns out to be a one-eared terrier chewing on a whalebone ring. He leads you through a passage that reeks of low tide and lower morals, emerging beside a rowboat half filled with rancid bait. The moon pins glow in your palm. Their shadows point northeast toward a jagged coastline. Classic guild misdirection. The real message is in the die weight. A hollow one rattles when you shake it, revealing a sliver of parchment listing coordinates. Halfway to the marked cove, the boat slams against something submerged. Jacques barks at the dark water as you haul up a barnacle-crusted crate. Inside, a dozen bottles of cognac and a bundle of letters sealed with fish scale wax. The top envelope bears your name in Guillaume's jagged script. If you're reading this, the guild's gone under. Use the sailor's chance to unlock the innocence gambit. Remember, the third lie sinks the ship. A gunshot cracks over the waves. The excise men's cutter slices through the fog, prow carving the night like a blade. Jacques growls, his teeth sinking into a bottle's cork. You've got maybe a minute before they board. The cognac, perfect for bribing dockworkers. The letters, no idea, but the wax seals shimmer with the same blue as Guillaume's shark-tooth necklace. You stash the crate under the bait, smear your face with squid ink, and grab an oar. Time to see if those sailors' superstitions hold water. As the cutter pulls alongside, you hum the three-note chant from the shack. The nearest officer pauses, his boot on the gunwale. His eyes flick to the dice strung around your neck, cod vertebrae carved with anchor symbols. "Saint Malo men," he mutters, spitting overboard. A grudging respect, or maybe fear. Sailors from that port were rumored to curse ships by burying bone dice in their ballast. A 1734 court-martial blamed a schooner's sinking on a mate from St. Malo, who'd enspelled the hull with gaming talismans. The excise men take 2 cognac bottles as tax, but miss the crate. Jacques licks the ink off his paws as you row into a cove where the cliffs swallow the moon. The game's simpler out here, no chance, no charms. Just you, a stolen crate, and the slow dissolve of stars into dawn. But the dice in your pocket hum like a storm in the making. split fins facing inward. The salt-stained letters crinkle as you unfold them, Guillaume's jagged script bleeding through the parchment like a map of his paranoia. The first page details a meeting in a Marseille tavern where philosophers argued over whether the bone game was chaos or calculation, a debate that nearly ended in a duel. One scholar threw a wine glass at a rival who claimed the dice were the devil's arithmetic. You trace the ink smudges, the paper still faintly reeking of squid ink and desperation. The second letter mentions a 1743 treatise by an anonymous author, likely the disgraced mathematician Jean-Baptiste Leclerc, arguing that the game's randomness mirrored the unpredictability of human fate. A man's luck, he wrote, is a ship with no rudder. But here's the twist. Leclerc wasn't just theorizing. He'd secretly coded political messages into the bone dice used by royal couriers, using the number sequences to coordinate smuggling routes. A single roll could mean safe passage or ambush ahead, depending on the alignment of the carved waves. Rumor has it he drowned in a boating accident after a miscalculation during a game with a rival spymaster, his body washed ashore with a die clenched in his fist. The one you now realize is tucked in your boot, its edges worn smooth by a century of secrets. The tavern door creaks open, a draft carrying the scent of burnt rosemary and pipe smoke. A woman in a moth-eaten scholar's coat slides into the booth beside you, her fingers drumming a rhythm that matches the chant from the docks. "You've read Leclerc's Folly," she says, nodding at the letters. "But did you know he stole the code from a Corsican nun's prayer beads?" She drops a cracked die onto the table, a twin to yours, etched with tiny constellations. Sister Maria Lucia used these to predict storms for Genoese fishermen, called them God's dice. Leclerc paid her in wine and flattery, then published her system as his own. The church burned her letters. He burned her reputation. You spin the die, watching the stars align into the shape of a ship's wheel. Historians still argue whether Leclerc's code was genius or heresy, or just a drunk's delusion. His final journal entry, scribbled hours before his death, reads, "The dice never lie, but men do." The scholar leans closer, her breath smelling of anise. The real game isn't in the roll, it's in the weight. She flips the die to reveal a hidden compartment housing a sliver of magnetized iron. Leclerc's couriers rigged the bones. A thumb on the scale. Sound familiar. Outside, the wind shifts, the kind of change sailors call a liar's breeze. You pocket the die, its heft now suspiciously uneven. The scholar vanishes into the crowd as a trio of men in ink-stained aprons approach, their hands calloused from years of carving bone. One tosses a knuckle bone onto the table, a challenge. The carvings are fresh, the edges sharp enough to draw blood. You recognize the symbols: a scale, a crown, and a hangman's noose. The gambler's trinity. "Play around," says the tallest carver, his voice like a rusted hinge. Leclerc's rules: No rigging. The stakes. Your letters against his silence. You roll first, a shaky hand sending the bone skittering into a tankard. The carver laughs, retrieving it with a pair of tweezers. "Le diable aim lest dace tremblance," he mutters. The devil loves a trembling die. His own roll lands with the noose facing up. Ah, the hangman means you're out of time. But the scholar's warning echoes in your skull. The weight, the weight, the weight. You snatch the die, prying open the compartment with a fishhook. Instead of iron, you find a scroll no larger than a matchstick. Unfurling, it reveals a list of names, Leclerc's network of informants. Their identities hidden in plain sight as wine merchants, cobblers, even a Parisian playwright. The carver pales. "Where did you get that?" Before you can answer, the tavern's lanterns flicker. A draft snakes through the room, extinguishing the lights. In the dark, the dye begins to glow, a bioluminescent fungus smeared into its grooves. Sister Maria Lucia's final innovation, perhaps. The carver swears in Provençal, backing away as the other patrons murmur about witchcraft. You slip out the back door, the list burning a hole in your pocket. Rain slicks the cobblestones, the storm's first drops hitting your neck like cold needles. Somewhere in the harbor, a ship's bell tolls. Leclerc's die hums in your hand, the magnetized iron tugging you north toward the old nun's chapel. The devil's arithmetic suddenly feels like a prayer. And the game, as always, is just getting interesting. The rain slicks your collar as you duck into the shadow of the chapel's crumbling bell tower. The bone die still humming in your palm like a trapped wasp. Sister Maria Lucia's chapel isn't a chapel at all. It's a half-collapsed storehouse near the docks. Its walls papered with peeling broadsides from the 1789 riots. A rusted iron grill creaks in the wind. The scent of wet stone and rotting fish thick enough to taste. You're not the first to come hunting tonight. 3 men in tricolor cockades huddle under a splintered awning, their whispers sharp as they pass a clay jug between them. One gestures wildly, his voice rising. The committee's spies are in the cafes, the brothels, even the boulangeries. You think they won't sniff out a nun's ghost story. The die tugs your hand toward a cellar door crusted with barnacles. Inside, the air reeks of brine and burnt tallow. Your boot crunches on something brittle, a scatter of fish vertebrae, bleached white and arranged in a spiral. A workbench holds a half-carved whale rib, its surface etched with symbols that match the dies. A guillotine, a scale, a cracked crown. You're reaching for it when a voice rasps behind you. Touch that, and you'll lose the hand. The woman steps from the shadows, her face a patchwork of scars and soot. She's holding a gutting knife in one hand and a clay pipe in the other, the smoke reeking of rosemary and something sharper. "You've got Leclerc's trinket," she says, nodding at the die. "And the list, pity. That'll get you hanged faster than singing Sa Ira in a royalist salon." Her laugh is a dry cough. "They say the nun's fungus glows brighter when a traitor's near. Let's test that, eh?" She flicks the die from your grip. It clatters onto the bench, the bioluminescent veins pulsing a sickly green. Fun fact, the glow comes from a rare algae that only grows on monkfish spines, Sister Maria Lucia's divine light was just a happy accident of coastal biology. The woman prods it with her blade. Revolutionaries used these to pass messages in 92. Carved codes into the bones, then let the algae dry. Hold it to a candle. The heat wakes the spores, and poof, secret maps glow like St. Elmo's fire. Clever, non. Clever enough to get them killed, you mutter, eyeing the knife. Clever enough to topple a king, she snaps. They smuggled plans in wine barrels, you know. Coated the vintage labels. 89 Bordeaux meant attack at dawn. 86 Burgundy meant fall back. The royalists drank their own defeat one bottle at a time. She leans closer, her breath a mix of garlic and gunpowder. But here's the joke. Half those codes were nonsense. Random scribbles made the crown waste time chasing shadows. The real plan was in the tavern songs. Ever heard La Marseillaise played on a drunk's jaw harp? A thud echoes above boots on rotten wood. The woman snuffs her pipe, plunging the room into gloom. The dye's glow sharpens, revealing a hidden compartment in the bench. Inside, a ledger, its pages crammed with names. Robespierre, Danton, even a young artillery officer named Bonaparte. Next to each, a series of numbers, dates, coordinates. Account books from Leclerc's wine shop, the woman whispers. Every purchase, a coded meeting. A dozen conspiracies in a receipt for 2 barrels of claret. The Committee of Public Safety burned the shop in 93, but he'd already moved the books. Smart man for a dead man. Outside, a shout. The woman shoves the ledger into your hands. They're here. Take the sewer grate behind the altar. It leads to the docks. And don't drop that die. The algae's worth more than your life. You're halfway to the grate when the door splinters. A pistol shot cracks the air, the bullet pinging off an iron cauldron. The woman curses, flinging her knife. It thuds into a soldier's thigh as you wrench open the grate, the stench of the sewers rising like a curse. The dye's glow paints the tunnel walls green, the algae flaring as you run. Somewhere ahead, water drips in a steady plink, plink, plink. Or is that another set of boots? The tunnel empties into a storm drain, the harbor's black waves slapping the stones below. A skiff waits, its lone occupant holding a lantern. You're late, growls the boatman, his accent all Marseille gutters. The Amitié sails with the tide. Give me the list. You hesitate, the ledger heavy in your coat. Historians still argue whether Leclerc's codes changed the revolution's course or just gave bored spies a puzzle to solve. The ledger's last page, a wine-stained recipe for bouillabaisse. The boatman's hand drifts to his belt. A pistol, a knife. The die hums again. You flip it, watching the algae's glow dance. The weight, the weight, the weight. You toss the ledger. The boatman snatches it, his grin a yellowed sneer. Smart. Now get in. We've got a ship to catch. As the skiff pulls into the harbor, the die warm in your fist, You count the lanterns on the Amadier's deck. 12. No, 13. An unlucky number. The boatman's shoulders tense. Somewhere behind you, the sewer grate clangs shut. The game, it seems, isn't done with you yet. The boat lurches as a wave slaps the hull, salt spray stinging your eyes. That 13th lantern sways wildly, its flame guttering. The boatman mutters a curse under his breath, something about fools and their bad luck numbers. Before spitting over the side, you clutch the rail, the wooden replica die in your pocket, digging into your palm. It's lighter than the bone ones, splintered at the edges. A cheap imitation of the real thing, like drinking vinegar and calling it wine. By dawn, the Amadier limps into a cove choked with fishing boats, their nets hanging limp. The air reeks of rotting seaweed and desperation. Overfishing, the boatman grunts, nodding at the empty nets. Cod's gone, herring's gone, even the damn mussels are hiding. You think your little bone dice matter. The sea got no time for games anymore. He's not wrong. You've heard the stories. Entire villages abandoned when the fish vanished. The once bustling ports now haunted by the ghosts of 100 hungry bellies. You slip into a tavern near the docks, the floor sticky with spilled ale. A grizzled fisherman in the corner carves a piece of driftwood into a crude die, his knife scraping rhythmically. They're using oak now, he says, not looking up. Bones are too scarce, but wood's got no memory, doesn't hum like the old ones. He spits a glob of tobacco into a spittoon. My granddad swore the best dice came from whale ribs, said they knew the ocean's secrets. Now, we're whittling chair legs. A barmaid slams a tankard in front of you, foam slopping over the edge. Don't listen to Jacques, she sneers. He's still bitter they banned the bone trade, me. I've got a set carved from a ship's mast. Sank in a storm off Calais. They say the woods cursed roll a 7, and you'll hear the drowned crew singing. She winks. Course, that's just to scare tourists. But it's good for business. The debate in the room grows heated. A merchant in a moth-eaten coat insists wooden dice are progress, while a one-eyed sailor slams his fist on the table. You ever tried reading the grain in oak? It's like asking a goat to recite poetry. The bones knew the tides. Wood's just dead. Historians still argue whether the switch to wood doomed the game's magic, or just exposed how much of its mystique was cheap theater. You're leaning toward theater. Later, in a back alley, you find a shop selling authentic bone dice. The shopkeeper's a wiry woman with ink-stained fingers. They're pig knuckles, she admits, shrugging. Soak 'em in brine, rub 'em with squid ink. Tourists can't tell the difference. She leans closer, her breath reeking of pickled herring. But you want the real thing, no. From under the counter, she slides a single bone die, yellowed with age. It thrums faintly, like a heartbeat. Last one I've got. Came off a shipwreck. They say it's from the Amadier herself. You freeze. The die's markings are identical to the one you lost in the sewer, same jagged runes, same faint seaweed scent. The shopkeeper's eyes narrow. You've seen its twin. They're connected. The pair's worth a fortune or a death sentence. Outside, a shout echoes. She slams the die into your hand. Take it and run as you duck into the maze of alleys. The 2 dice vibrate in your pocket, pulling you toward the harbor. The Amédée's wreck looms on the horizon, half submerged, its ribs jutting from the water like a skeletal hand. The boatman's voice hisses in your memory. The sea takes what it's owed. You're knee-deep in the surf when the first wave hits. The dice burn like ice against your thigh. Somewhere, a 13th lantern flickers beneath the waves. The salt water stings your knees as the second wave slams into your ribs, knocking the breath from your lungs and the ancient die from your grip. It tumbles through the foam, glowing faintly green now, carving a path through the murk toward the Amédée's carcass. You scramble after it, seaweed wrapping around your ankles like the bony fingers of every sailor who vanished with that damned ship. Inside the wreck, sunlight filters through rotting planks, painting stripes on walls encrusted with barnacles. Your boots crunch over oyster shells and shattered pottery until there, lodged between 2 ribs of the hull, a waterlogged chest's hinges gleam despite centuries underwater. The twin die in your pocket pulses like a ticking bomb. You pry it open. Moldering velvet lines the interior, cradling a manual bound in eel skin. The pages crackle as you peel them apart, revealing diagrams of fishbone arrangements and rules written in a looping cipher. A pressed octopus tentacle serves as a bookmark beside a margin note. For God's sake, never play the moon tide gambit unless you're ready to lose a kidney. You glance at your own torso, still intact. For now, scholars would kill for this. Literally. In 1792, a Parisian linguist named Fournier cracked the game's core ciphers using naval flag codes, only to drown in his bath 3 days later. Coincidence? The official inquest said yes. His mistress claimed his last words were, "The crabs are cheating." History's a messy business. The manual's 5th chapter stops you cold. Strategy tables list moves like Siren's Retreat and Kraken's Kiss, but the instructions dissolve into riddles. To walk the lobster's path, count the waves between betrayal and broth. You mutter a curse sailors haven't used since the reign of Louis XV. This isn't a game. It's a psychotic mermaid's shopping list, but then a breakthrough. Between pages, you find a scrap of a woman's diary. Marie-Claude Valorand, 1803. Papa says the true game isn't in the bones, but the gaps between them. He marked his best strategies in the tavern's outhouse rafters. If you read this, bring lime to spare your nose. Historians still argue whether Valorand's outhouse tactics were revolutionary genius or the ramblings of a man who ate too much fermented squid. You're halfway through decoding a strategy called the maelstrom when water sloshes behind you. The boatman stands in the doorway, a rusted harpoon in hand. Thought you'd skip town with the goods, eh? He nods at the manual. That's my inheritance. Great-great-granduncle served on the Amédée. died clutching that book and a turkey leg. We never found the turkey. A standoff in a shipwreck. Classic Tuesday. He lunges. You duck, slipping on a carpet of mussels. The manual flies into the air, pages fanning like a wounded seagull. The boatman catches it mid-swipe, grinning triumphantly, until the twin die in your pocket shrieks like a tea kettle. His smile dies as the wreck groans, planks snapping like kindling. You triggered the damned tide lock. He bellows as seawater geysers through the cracks. The what? Just run. You're 10 strokes from the surface when the Amitié collapses inward, swallowing the manual, the boatman, and what you dearly hope wasn't the last surviving copy of How to Win at Fishbones without getting murdered by your local harbor master. Back on shore, you find the ink from the manual's pages has transferred to your hands, reverse imprinted like pirate tattoos. A moon phases chart on your left palm. Tide tables snaking up your wrist. The maelstrom strategy glows faintly on your forearm whenever waves crash. It's either the find of the century or a terminal case of oceanic eczema. The grizzled fisherman from the tavern finds you scrubbing your skin raw with salt. Heh, got the stink on you, eh? He spits. My cousin tried to sell a fake manual once. Wrote the text in squid ink mixed with holy water. Every full moon, the letters rearranged to say, "Stop stealing sacramental wine, you heathen." He chuckles, whittling a chunk of driftwood into something resembling a die or a very tiny club. Afternoon slips into evening. Your skin still itches. You roll the surviving bone die onto a soggy tavern table. It lands on a glyph of a leaping sturgeon. The barmaid freezes mid-pour. Where'd you get that? Family heirloom. Bullshit. That's the mark of Saint Malo. Means you're owed a debt from the grave. She backs away slowly. They say the last guy who rolled that symbol got visited by a drowned priest demanding back taxes. You wait all night. No priest, just a drunk lobsterman who mistakes you for his ex-wife and tries to sell you a clarinet. At dawn, you return to the harbor. The waves hush secrets you're half tempted to understand. Your skin glows faintly with strategies no one's used in lifetimes. Somewhere beneath the murk, the Amitié's bones settle into their final rest, and with them, answers you'll never dig up. The die warms in your palm, humming a lullaby in a key that didn't exist before pianos drowned. The salt-crusted cobblestones of St. Malo's harbor crunch under your boots as you duck into a dimly lit workshop tucked between a fishmonger's stall and a shop selling antique sextants. The air reeks of brine and wood smoke, but beneath it, there's the sharp tang of bone dust. A woman in a leather apron leans over a workbench, her chisel tapping a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like a sea shanty. You clear your throat. She doesn't look up. If you're here for the ghost dice, I'm out of stock. Try the tourist traps by the docks. You slide the ancient die from your pocket, the one that's been humming like a seasick bumblebee since you fished it out of the Amitié's wreck. The carver freezes mid-tap. Where'd you get that? Found it in a shipwreck, along with a manual that tried to kill me. she snorts. Sounds about right. Those 18th century sailors loved their cursed knickknacks. Her fingers brush the dye's surface, tracing symbols worn smooth by centuries of use. You know, they used to carve these from whale vertebrae. Boiled in vinegar until the marrow turned to jelly, smelled like Satan's pantry. But the bones held the sea's memory better than oak. She nods at a glass jar on her shelf, murky liquid sloshing around what looks like a pickled squid. Still, use the old methods, minus the cholera. You glance at her work in progress, a set of dice etched with bioluminescent algae patterns. Tourist junk, she mutters, but the real art's in the old ways. She pulls a velvet box from a drawer, revealing a die carved from narwhal tusk, its surface inlaid with abalone shell. Made this for a collector in Osaka. GPS chip in the center, 3D printed core. The Japanese love their high-tech relics. Me, I'd rather wrestle a squid. The workshop door bangs open. A man in a sodden peacoat stumbles in, clutching a Ziploc bag full of teeth. Marine archaeologist, the carver whispers, rolling her eyes. Thinks he's Indiana Jones, if Indy collected mollusk fossils. The man slaps the bag on the counter. Megalodon teeth. Found them in a cave under the cliffs, perfect for a custom set non. The carver pokes a tooth with her chisel. These are fossilized cow molars. Last time I checked, cows didn't swim. He deflates. But the listing said, eBay lies. Come back when you found something that didn't come from a petting zoo. As he slinks out, she turns back to you. You'd think the Marine in his title meant something. Last week, he tried to sell me a mermaid ribcage made of PVC pipe. You nod at a framed document on the wall, a yellowed page from a 1743 ship's log. Reproduction, she says, original in Marseille. Captain's log from the Etoile de Mer. Lists a crewman who won a month's wages playing Jew derrets with a die carved from his own tooth. Got infected. Died. Moral of the story, never gamble with your molars. The die in your hand pulses warm. The carver notices. Ah, you've got a live one. They do that when they've been woken up. Like a bear, but less claw-y. She flips open a laptop, showing a 3D scan of a die swirling with digital kelp patterns. Some uni in California paid me to make these. Wanted to digitize the maritime ludic experience. I told them you can't bottle a storm in a JPEG, but money talks. Outside, the harbor bells clang. The carver's expression sobers. You know why the old players used bone. They thought it held the animal's luck. A good die wasn't just a tool, it was a witness. Carved from a fish that survived a shark attack. Unbeatable in a wager. Made from a shark that ate a fisherman. Cursed. But here's the kicker, she leans in. In 1789, a Bordeaux vintner won a game using a die made from his wife's rib. She drowned in the Garonne. He swore her ghost rolled the numbers. People called him a madman. Then he won 13 games straight. Coincidence? The church burned him for witchcraft. His last words, she's still rolling. You glance at your own die. The carver smirks. Don't worry. The curse usually takes a few decades to kick in. She tosses you a business card embossed with a mermaid skeleton. Bring that thing to the midnight market at Mont Saint Mitchell. Ask for Marcel. He's got a collection you'll want to see. Just don't mention my name. We're in a feud over a 3D printer he borrowed and forgot to return. As you leave, she calls out. And if you meet a guy selling authentic leprechaun bones, punch him for me. The street outside is all salt and twilight, the air thick with the promise of rain. Your die thrums a new rhythm now, a staccato beat that matches your pulse. Somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn groans, the kind of sound that's less a noise and more a riddle. You've got a market to find, a feud to dodge, and a sneaking suspicion the Amadier's bones aren't done with you yet. The game, it seems, is still rolling. The cobblestones turn to wet sand underfoot as you follow the flicker of lanterns toward Mont Saint Mitchell's silhouette, a stone giant rising from the mist. Tide pools glint like scattered coins under the moon, and the smell hits you first. Fried dough, seaweed, and the unmistakable reek of a vendor hawking authentic mermaid oil candles. The midnight market sprawls across the tidal flats, stalls cobbled together from fishing nets and salvaged ship planks. A teenager in a VR headset gestures wildly at a holographic advert above his booth. Augmented reality bone dice. Battle sea monsters from your living room. You sidestep a trio of influencers posing with a cardboard cutout of a vintage fisherman, their phone lights bleaching the twilight into something cheap and electric. Marcel's stall sits halfway up the mount, tucked between a tarot reader using oyster shells and a woman selling licorice-coated anchovies. You recognize him by the neon fanny pack straining across his middle, and the way he's berating a customer holding a plastic trident. That's a garden rake dipped in glue and glitter. He snaps, snatching it back. I wouldn't spear a tuna with that thing, let alone Neptune. Your cursed die vibrates softly as you approach. Marcel spins, nostrils flaring like a bloodhound's. Non. Absolutely not. I don't care if Clothilda sent you tell that ink-swilling traitor her laser engravers in a better home now. He stabs a finger at your pocket. But I'll take that relic off your hands, trade you for a genuine 1793 Freedom Fry cast in authentic revolutionary lard. You decline. He shrugs, producing a velvet bag from under his stall. Suit yourself, but you'll want this game manual from the Marie Claris. Sank in a squall off Calais. Waterlogged, sure, but it's got the only surviving rules for Jew Derert's Écoute Toi. Played by lighthouse keepers during storms, they'd wager lighthouse duty shifts. Loser had to polish the lens for a month. Real shit job whale oil stains. Seagull attacks. He leans closer. Found it jammed inside a taxidermied puffin. Collector in Nantes swore it screamed when he opened the box. Turns out, it was just a rusty music box mechanism. Still fun story. The die pulses hotter. Marcel's eyes narrow. Keep that thing away from my inventory. Last month, one of those cursed knucklebones shorted out a €7,000 die scanner, put a hex on the Wi-Fi too. My nephew's Minecraft world hasn't recovered. He gestures to a glass case behind him, filled with bone dice displayed on a rotating cupcake stand. See that opal-inlaid beauty carved from the rib of Josephine, Bonaparte's favorite poodle. Dog died at Waterloo, or so the seller claimed. Radiocarbon dating said 1946. Oops. A gull screeches overhead. Marcel freezes. Don't move. He whips a slingshot from his fanny pack and fires a salted pebble into the dark. Something squawks. Tourists feed them croissants, he mutters. Now they've unionized. You ask about his collection. He grins, revealing a gold-capped molar etched with tiny anchors. Ah, the good stuff. He leads you behind the stall to a locked trunk plastered with stickers from every maritime museum from Oslo to Okinawa. Inside, a die nestled in faded silk, its surface scarred with jagged symbols, recovered from the rare nocturne wreck. Merchant ship turned gambling den. Sank in a hurricane in, let's see, 1789. Captain's log claimed they'd been winning too hard, angered a sea witch. Historians still argue whether the ship was sabotaged by rivals, or if the crew just sucked at navigation. Me, I blame the witch, more cinematic. He flips the die over. A hairline crack glows faintly. Careful, this one's moody. Did a whole poltergeist routine in my bathtub last week. But hey, free creme brulee torch. The market's din fades as you hold the rare nocturne die. For a heartbeat, the salt air tastes like gunpowder and regret. Marcel snaps his fingers. No time traveling on my watch. That'll be $3.50. You haggle him down to a handful of euros and a promise to badmouth Clothelda's catheter-shaped cocktail stirrers at the next flea market. Deal, he says, slamming the trunk. Now scram. The night eels arrive soon. Illegal delicacy. Gets messy when the food cops show up. Down at the waterline, you roll both dice in your palm. The Amédée's die spins counterclockwise. The rare nocturne piece shudders like a compass needle. They settle on matching symbols, a coiled eel and a six-pointed star. Somewhere beyond the lights, the tide whispers secrets in a language older than dice, older than bone. A wave licks your boots, cold and insistent. When it retreats, it leaves a scallop shell in the sand. Inside, a chip of ivory carved with a single word. Jower. Play. You pocket it, smile grim, and turn toward the harbor. The game's not done with you. But then again, the sea never is. The lanterns along the shore dim to a soft amber, their reflections trembling on the water like fireflies caught in glass. The sea's whispers grow tender. Each wave a lullaby of salt and silt. You feel the weight of the jower in your palm, its edges worn smooth as a pebble, warm with the memory of 1,000 tides. The market's clamor has dissolved. Now there is only the sigh of wind through dune grass and the distant creak of boats swaying at anchor. Stars blur above, their light softened by a veil of mist. The horizon melts into shadow, blurring the line between sky and sea, until the world feels like a dream half remembered. Sand shifts beneath your feet, cool and yielding, as the last traces of salt air cling to your skin. The jower glints once, faint as a moth's wing, before settling into stillness. You breathe in slow, deep, and the night exhales with you. The ache of the day unravels, carried away on a current older than time. Somewhere a gull cries, its call muffled by distance. The waves retreat, then return, each one gentler than the last, until even the sea seems to hold its breath. Darkness folds around you like a cloak, soft and weightless. The stars fade, the wind stills, and for a moment there is nothing but the quiet pulse of the world, cradling you in its endless, patient arms.